Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha, Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Hosea, the first chapter. And as we went into the previous book right before this one, which was Amos, similarly, Hosea is a prophet, though not of Judah per se, right, like Amos was, who was then sent to prophesy to the northern kingdom. Hosea also likewise prophesied against the northern kingdom of the wickedness that they were doing, right? The idolatry, the oppression of the poor, just their wicked ways that they just continue to remain in. So as we go through that chapter, you'll see that recurring theme in there. And yet, even still, you also see points in there of the Lord discussing the mercy, the ultimate mercy that he would show at the last days, gathering us back together. So I'm going to pull up this timeline here. And so we can take a look back at that. Right. So as we saw here, which Hosea was contemporaries with Amos, Isaiah. As you can see, even here, they have Nahum, Micah. Okay. So you had some of these prophets here around that time. And chances are that they would have known each other or known of each other. And you'll notice that sometimes some of the writings are similar. Okay. And even when you read in the book of Jeremiah, there are some points in there that are very similar to what's written in Isaiah. Okay, so similar to how today, as prophets, we are acquainted with one another, right? Now we know one another, back then, they also had knowledge of one another, right? But it wasn't really, it wasn't necessary for Isaiah to write and say, hey, by the way, I was chilling with Micah, this time, and then this happened. That's why you don't see that kind of stuff in there. But anyway, so here we are with Hosea over here, and we see here as we read in the first verse, it will also give you a placement, right, of around what time period, under which rulers or which kings were these prophets on the scene. Okay, so here in Hosea 1:1, as it reads, the word of the Lord Yahweh that came on to Hosea, which the name Hosea in Hebrew is Hawashai, all right, which means, I believe it's deliverer or deliver. Let's pull up that word or that name. Here we go. All right, Hawashai. So yeah, here they have it as salvation, right? Deliver, salvation, along the same lines. But yeah, you have your salvation. So going back here, right, as it reads, the word that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. And if you remember, Ahaz was one of those kings during the time of Isaiah, right? So was Hezekiah and so on. So it says here, the kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, which this was Jeroboam the second, the son of Joash, king of Israel, right? Because remember, these kings, they didn't necessarily reign at the same time, right? But when you look at the timeline, you can see here you have Uzziah, and then, let's see, you have Jotham, and then Ahaz, and then Hezekiah, and so on. So, in any case, at this point in time, the Assyrian Empire is still there, right? They're pretty much gaining some not really even gaining traction. They're already an empire at this point in time, but they haven't besieged Samaria just yet, right? That destruction of the northern kingdom, right, as a kingdom hasn't happened just yet. And that's why you'll still see reference to that in the writings of Hosea as he continues to prophesy against them and warn them to say, hey, this is what the Lord is going to do if you don't stop the wickedness that you're doing. So going back to the book of Hosea, chapter 1, verse 2. The beginning of the word of the Lord Yahweh by Hosea. And the Lord said to Hosea, Go, take unto thee a wife of whoredoms, and children of whoredoms, for the land hath committed great whoredom, departing from the Lord. So now, similar to other prophets, Hosea, as we're reading here, his life, right, was to be like a similitude to represent on a higher level the relationship between the Lord and Israel. Okay, and if you thought a prophet's life was easy, well, think again, right? Because these were the things, right, that sometimes that's why sometimes the scriptures will say the burden of the word of the Lord, right, that came upon such and such. So in any case, the Lord tells Hosea, and this is literal, right, in the sense that Hosea actually went and married a harlot or a whore, as it says here, knowing that she wouldn't be faithful unto him. And that was the whole point, to represent the state of the nation of Israel going a whoring after other gods, and not being faithful to the Most High. So as it says here, Go, take unto thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms, for the land hath committed great whoredom. So what is that whoredom that the land or the people were committing? Worshipping other idols, okay, following other gods, following the heathenistic ways and customs. Now, if you notice, in the wilderness, before going into the land of Canaan, and taking it over, there are certain laws in the Torah where the Lord tells us pretty much to be isolated from these other nations. Okay, and that's likened unto a man keeping his woman at home. Okay, as the scriptures tell you in the book of Sirach, lest she abuse herself through overmuch liberty. Because the Lord understood, just like a man understands how nature works. So you don't even want to take that risk. But as much as the Lord tried, of course, you had Israel that still went a whoring. They found a way, and they departed, as it says, from the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, which conceived and bare him a son. Now keep in mind that we're reading this in one verse, right? Obviously, this didn't happen in the span of a couple of hours. All right, so the practical manifestation of this was you take this woman, you live with this woman. She's your wife now, okay? And in process of time, right, you go in onto her, plant seed in her, and then 9 months later, right around there, she has, as I said, she bare him a son. Okay, so you gotta visualize that this is an actual life that's going on. Time is passing. Okay. And so, when you read it, it's one thing, but keep in mind, like, imagine this, right? Imagine you're a wife that you are laying with, that you are putting seed into, and because of what the Lord said, like, this is symbolic here, right? So it's like you're living a life, but it's really a similitude. Anyway, so she bears him a son. Verse 4, And the Lord Yahweh said unto him, Call his name Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu, and I will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. Now, Jezreel, when you go into the Hebrew, right, is I believe is Yazar Yahzarai Allah, okay, which is God sows. Let's go into that name. All right, so you have the Yah, Zarai, Allah. So the root words here are really Allah, which is God, and Zarai, which is to sow, right? So as you can see here, Jezreel, or God sows, Yah, Zarai, Allah. And the Most High here is referring to, right? I pulled up the account here in 2 Chronicles. Now remember, the Lord, when you read in history, the Lord set up Jehu to avenge the blood that was shed by the house of Ahab, right? For the wickedness that he did. And so Jehu ends up wiping out the house of Ahab. But then he goes a step further, okay, as we're about to read here, and sheds more blood. And this happened at Jezreel. And so the Lord says, I'm going to avenge that blood upon the house of Jehu. Okay, it won't be long now. Now, if we take a look back here at our our trusty timeline here, right? We can see here we have Jeroboam II, we have Joash, Jehoahaz, and Jehu, right? And if we look up here, let's see, Jehu, Bible. So if we pull up the wiki on Jehu, we can take a look here at his issue. So that'll be his sons or children. And sometimes you want to look at that because the successor might not be the person's actual, descendant. It might be somebody that kills them or whatever. So Jehoahaz comes after, right, son of Jehu. And after Jehoahaz, you had Jehoash, okay, which, as it says here, he was also of the house of Jehu. And then you had Jeroboam II. Let's see here. Yep, successor of Joash. That was his predecessor, and that was his father. So Jeroboam II here is still of the house of Jehu. Okay, and I want to take a look here at Zechariah. Okay, so here we have. All right. Yeah. So anyway, the Lord is saying this because at this point in time, Jeroboam II is the king, right? And he's still of the house of Jehu, right? As it was Jeroboam II, a descendant of Jehu. Yep, there you go. Cool. So coming back here, let's read that account, right? This is what Jehu ends up doing. And in this case, yes, he executed the judgment of the Lord, but then the scriptures tell you that he didn't really follow the Lord, right? His heart wasn't after the Lord as like the King David was or some of the other righteous kings. So this is 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 5. It says here, he walked also after their counsel and went with Jehoram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, to war against Hazael, king of Syria, at Ramoth Gilead, and the Syrians smote Joram. So this he is dealing with Ahaziah. And he returned to be healed in Jezreel because of the wounds which were given him at Ramah, when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. And Azariah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to see Jehoram, the son of Ahab, at Jezreel because he was sick. And the destruction of Ahaziah was of God by coming to Joram. So he was going to be taken out because he was too closely associated with the northern kingdom, knowing the wickedness they were doing there. The Lord wasn't with that. For when he was come, he went out with Jehoram against Jehu, the son of Nimshi, whom the Lord had anointed to cut off the house of Ahab. And it came to pass that when Jehu was executing judgment upon the house of Ahab, and found the princes of Judah, and the sons of the brethren of Ahaziah, that ministered to Ahaziah, he slew them. Okay, it says here, and he sought Ahaziah, and they caught him, for he was hid in Samaria, and brought him to Jehu. And when they had slain him, they buried him, because they said, he is the son of Jehoshaphat, who sought the Lord Yahweh with all his heart. So the house of Ahaziah had no power to keep still the kingdom. So not only did Jehu slay take out the house of Ahab, but he also went after Ahaziah here and his brethren. Okay, and that was a little too much bloodshed than what he was appointed to do. So coming back here to Hosea 1:4, the Lord says, yeah, I'm going to avenge that blood upon the house of Jehu. Because at this point, Jehu, I think Jehu was already dead at this point. Yeah, because Jehu reigned around this time. So Jehu was already gone, okay, during the time of Hosea. But his house, okay, you can see here, Jeroboam, I believe, was still reigning at this time. All right, and it tells you that in Hosea 1:1. Jeroboam. So, as it says here, and I will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. So the Lord is saying in due time, right, which is at this point was coming up pretty closely, that he was going to bring that destruction of the kingdom of the house of Israel. Hey. And so how is he going to do this? Ultimately, by the northern kingdom being besieged, okay, by the Assyrians, and then ultimately, being a siege being put to them. Verse 5, it says, "And it shall come to pass at that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." And the bow, right, as you see in other accounts of the scriptures, right, other precepts, bow here representing the power. Okay, and if you reference, for example, warfare, right, back then in the ancient world, the bow was also a very powerful weapon. Okay, that was used on the battlefield. Okay, so here the Lord is saying, I'm going to break that power of Israel, right, in the valley of Jezreel. So the kingdom is going to be broken down, and they're going to be powerless against the enemies that are going to come against them. In this case, the Assyrians. Verse 6, "And she conceived again, and bare a daughter. And God said unto him, Call her name Loruhamah, for I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away." And in Loruhamah, right, in the Hebrew is La'ah Ramach, I think. Let's see. Let's confirm that. And as we know, La'ah means no, right, or not. And we have here, or Rachama, there we go, La'ah Rachama, which means no mercy. All right, you have that Rachama, mercy over there. So the Lord says, so here, Hosea first has a son, right? The Lord says, call him Jezreel, okay? God sows, because this is what I'm going to do. And then, in process of time, right, Hosea's wife, I think was the name, Gomer, right, ends up conceiving again, and this time she gives birth to a daughter. The Lord says, call her name Loruhamah, or La'ah Rachama, which means no mercy, for I will have no mercy, or I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel. Similarly, as he said by the mouth of Amos, which was that, I've been sending these prophets to you to warn you, to warn you, to warn you. And you know what? At this point, now it's over. Okay, I'm no more going to, right? There's the account where Amos sees this plumb line, right, being held, and the Lord basically tells him this is to measure the correctness of Israel, because at this point, right, I'm no longer going to ignore their wickedness that they've been doing. Okay, and now I'm going to bring judgment upon them. So similarly, right, in this time of Hosea, the Lord is telling him, hey, yeah, it's pretty much over for the northern kingdom, and they were going to be taken away, right? So destroyed, that kingdom was going to be broken down. And as we read as we read when we went through the book of Kings, 2nd Kings in particular, we saw the destruction of the northern kingdom and their deportation. Verse 7, "But I will have mercy upon the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord Yahweh their God. And I will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, by horses, nor by horsemen." Now, once again, as we went through, more so in the book of Chronicles, right, 2nd Chronicles, after the northern kingdom had been taken out of their land, right, you had that siege by Shalmaneser V, and I believe it was completed by Sargon. But after that, you had Sennacherib, right, and Sennacherib came against Judah. And at this point, the king was Hezekiah, right? So remember, Sennacherib sent his commanders. They came, they tried to scare Israel, talk all this crap. But the Lord ended up sending an angel, right, that slew, I believe it was 84 or 85,000 of their men overnight, and caused them to flee right back to their own land. So here the Lord, as the Lord said, right, he would deliver Judah, and likewise when the Assyrians came, the Lord did deliver them by an angel. Okay, so not by them going to war or anything of that sort, but by basically divine intervention. Verse 8, "Now when she had weaned Loruhamah, she conceived and bare a son." So Once again, keep in mind, it's not that 9 a.m. she bore her son Jezreel, 12 p.m. now comes Lo-Ruhamah, and then, 3 p.m. you're going to have Lo-Ami just in time for dinner. That's not how it works, right? This is once again in process of time, okay? So after Lo-Ruhamah has been weaned, right, she's good. She ain't drinking on that. She ain't sucking on them titties no more, right? No drinking no breast milk. Then, as it says in verse 9, then said God, or Salaki in verse 8 again, now when she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived and bare a son. So Hosea basically had two sons and a daughter, right, as we are reading here. So the first son was Jezreel, the daughter was Lo-Ruhamah, and the other son here, as it says, then said God, call his name Lo-Ami, which in the Hebrew is La'a Ain Yah, which means not my people. Okay, La'a meaning no or not, and I'm people, Yah my, right? So not my people. For ye are not my people, and I will not be your God. So now, we later on, right, throughout the history of Israel, we see the effects of this play out, right? As where, you have one of the major points when Israel lost, right? They lost that sort of their way, right? Their heritage there was during the intertestamental period when you had that the great Hellenization. Okay, and that leads to the whole mystery of the Gentiles in the New Testament, where you have Israelites that don't know they're Israelites, that are, following heathenistic ways, and they need to be taught again and brought back, and so on and so forth. And then, and even after that, right, you have the falling away to where now the whole nation, right, we just completely fell off and didn't even know who we were, right, up until this time period that we're in. Okay, so by the Lord saying this, it represented him casting us off as his people, in which we needed, right, or it required Yahushua to come and do what he did. As the Apostle Paul mentions, we have basically been adopted, right, back to the Father, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. Verse 10, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea. Okay, so now, as I mentioned before in the beginning, that the Lord is pronouncing judgment, but you'll notice, right, I think even in the book of Zephaniah, in the book of Amos, in the prophecies that these prophets, when they prophesied, yes, they pronounced judgment against Israel, but there were also points in there in which they would mention this greater deliverance that at some point would come, right? The days come, saith the Lord, right? Or in that day, saith the Lord. See, so there was going to be some point in the future in which the Lord was going to show this great mercy on Israel, and like an eternal mercy, all right, and have us return back to a fruitful and peaceful state. So verse 10, it says here, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, as to say they would still be innumerable, right, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living God. Okay, and the primary place where that's taking place is here. Okay, Babylon the Great. And that's why even till today, right, you still have some people that have a hard time believing that we are the Israelites, because we're reading an example of it now, right? Because the Lord casts us off from being his people. And now, right, we're coming back to that. Okay, and starting with the prophets, right, the spirit of Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai, Israelites, right, the true Israelites are being told that they are the children of Israel. Okay, they're being awoken, right, by the Spirit of the Lord back to their nationality. Okay, back to knowing who they are, who is their God, and so on and so forth. Verse 11, then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together. So we know that this didn't happen at any point in time historically, because after the prophesying of Hosea, right, shortly after, even around that time, when the northern kingdom, the bulk of them were taken captive to Mesopotamia, right, to Assyria, they ended up leaving there and coming to the Americas. But the southern kingdom stayed in Israel, right? They stayed in the east, endured all the way through till the time of the Romans, through the siege, through all that, through the scattering and so on. But eventually, right, we all, both kingdoms ended up here in America. So historically, right, when you look at the history of Israel, there wasn't a point in time where the children of Judah and the children of Israel were gathered together. Okay, and that's because that's happening now, and will be fully fulfilled, right, at the return of the Lord, because that's going to begin with the elect, right? The elect, which are both of the southern and of the northern kingdom, are going to be those that are gathered first together by the word of the Lord, okay, by the Spirit of the Lord. As it says, and appoint themselves one head, okay, which is to say they would be under one rule, all right, i.e. the house of David. And we know that you have David, which is the king, okay, and above David you have Yahushai, okay, which is the ultimate king, the King of Kings. And then we know, obviously, as you go up the chain, you have, the Most High, which there's none greater, okay. It says, and they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. All right, and ultimately that's going to be that deliverance of Israel, really the elect, right? That unification of Israel and Judah being delivered, okay, from this land, and ultimately being taken and planted, okay, a stable tree, a new tree in the land of Israel. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the book of Hosea, the first chapter. As we can see here, Hosea is yet another one of the prophets that the Lord sent to prophesy against the northern kingdom, warning of that impending judgment he would bring upon them. But also, the Lord used his life as a similitude to represent the relationship between God and the children of Israel. So with that, I'm going to end it here. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.